Hey, so I finally finished the Book of Sith, and I thought I'd just give like some overall impressions. Probably won't go into as much detail as I did with the Jedi Path book that I read previously, just because it's been a few weeks since I read this, so my memory's a little bit fuzzy already. But if you're interested, we can go through a few things. So, like the Jedi Path, this is a hardcover book. And it has a little Disney thing on the back, which, Disney. Okay, so maybe we'll start with the back. Star Wars, Book of Sith, Secrets from the Dark Side. Over the centuries, as Sith Lords rose to power, a few recorded their philosophy and schemes to seize control of the galaxy. When they fell, their knowledge vanished, or so it seemed. Their writings were passed among select Sith and even Jedi, who added their thoughts to the rare pages. In his quest for domination, Darth Sidious tracked down what remained of the 5 most legendary dark side texts. Drawing from that knowledge, he wrote a 6th text, his own manifesto. These collected documents form the Book of Sith. With this book, you can unleash the power and madness of the dark side. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so, this is sort of like as if Luke has stumbled on it, and so he writes some stuff, and then cute dark title page, and yeah, there's not really any contents page like there was with the Jedi Path. Instead, you've got a preface, and he sort of goes on about some stuff, and then there's this section which sort of gives an introduction to each of the sections in the book, and then instead of needing page numbers, what they've done is you can see there's a whole bunch of different kinds of page, and so you just sort of like, pretty easy to find different sections just by, picking the texture of each one. So, that's kind of cute. Oh my god, the camera's slipping. Hey! Let me just tighten my tripod. Yeah, no, sorry, I'm a little bit tired. It's also raining, and yeah, I'm a bit out of it, but we'll do our best. So if you remember the Jedi Path one, that all the pages were basically the same. It had a content section, and it also had like a signature section, so everyone who writes their little handwritten notes in the book, they have their own handwriting, and, it's all listed there. But in this, you still get notes from people like Luke, but they always sign their name at the end. And there's no like list of people, so it's sort of the same idea as the other book, but done a little bit differently. So if we go to the first, so after all the introductory stuff, we've got the first bit, which is who's that written by? I don't know. Sorza Sin. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but it's basically about how the Sith Empire came to be, like the origins of the Sith. So that's got this sort of edging, and it's written like a diary, first person. I mean, they're all first person, I think. Got some little pictures and things, and then yeah, you can see like different kinds of annotations. We've got Darth Sidious there, and a few other different ones. We've got Yoda, and we've got Mace Windu. So each section has its own different little commenters, and that first section is not just about the origins of the Sith Order, but also like the Sith people as a species. Goes through all that kind of history, like when the first sort of dark breakaway from the Jedi, who became to call themselves the Sith, when they discovered the Sith people and basically took over, and the things they learned there, about Sith culture, Sith weapons. There's also a bit about, there's like, I think the author of this one is like into manipulating biology to create monsters and stuff, so there's a bit of stuff about that in here somewhere, and alchemy and so on, and other technologies from back then. But yeah, no, heaps of history type stuff. Here we go, some war beasts, and whatever. So that's, I guess, yeah, basically that. Then the next section is Darth Malgus, and that looks more like a maths textbook. I don't know if you can see the sort of grid pattern. And this is probably the section that I was most underwhelmed by. Like, I think what Darth Sidious writes in the beginning, in his introduction, is like, oh, this shows how, like, anger can sustain you through war and blah, blah, blah. But to me, it was just, like, it's a diary of, bureaucrats fucking everything up, and I just was like, yeah, okay, we'll get to the point. And it was just a diary of like all the military stuff he was going on. Some of it successful, some of it like there's someone else in the Sith organization trying to take all the credit and all that. And I'm just like, okay, why did this need to be in this book that's supposed to tell you all about how to be Sith and all this kind of stuff? I mean, it's really just a history section, and I don't feel like I really learned very much from it. Yeah, so, I mean, maybe I've forgotten stuff, but I remember when I was reading it, I was just like, yeah, I don't know about this. I mean, there are some, like, diagrams of ships and things, but I wasn't into that section. So, skipping to the next one, this is where we get the rule of two, obviously Darth Bane, and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I don't immerse myself into Star Wars, like, extended universe kind of stuff. I've never been that obsessed. I watch the main movies, and then, you know, occasionally read a few theories, and then I've known a few people who've told me stuff, and, yeah. So, the impression I had of the rule of two is, like, it had to be brought in because the Sith, like, you know, the dark side makes you crazy, and so there was heaps of infighting, and that's why they needed a rule of two. But this, it does mention that there's infighting, but the bigger concern seems to be that if lots of Sith have dark side power, blah, 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 then it kind of dilutes the power of the dark side or something. So the idea that he seems to be pushing is that if there's only two, you're concentrating all that power into a smaller space, which, I mean, I don't really know how the Force is supposed to work, but I kind of feel like if you've got more people, they even give an example of where they've got a whole bunch of Sith types who make this massive bomb by pooling all their power and just like destroying everything, including themselves. And that seems to be a thing that you could probably only do if you had a lot of people instead of just concentrating it into do whatever. So I found that to be a bit of a contradiction, and I don't know how that fits into things. There's stuff about the title of Darth, where that comes from. And then it gets into, you know, obviously if there's only two of them, they can't rely on the old armies and conquests that they used to. So that's where they go into the start of the Sith being more secretive and in the shadows and manipulating things, you know, just behind the scenes. Stuff about selecting an apprentice, hopes for the future, lightsaber construction kinds of things. So you get some of that technical stuff that was also in the Jedi path, but from the dark side perspective. Armor, combat. Yeah, so that's probably more close to what the Jedi path was like. Kind of interesting. I guess my idea of the rule of two might have been a bit off, or I don't know. Anyway, so that was kind of cool to read. The next section is Wild Power by Mother Talzin. And I have a feeling this probably connects to like the Clone Wars cartoon, which I never got around to watching, so maybe I'm missing something here. It seemed a little bit odd, but I guess it's a different perspective on Darkseid. I'm just like, does this really need to be in a book about Sith? It could just be a book about Darkseid stuff. But yeah, no, so that has made it into here. I guess, like, if you're considering this is meant to be Darth Sidious collecting a bunch of Darkseid stuff to turn into his own little book of Sith, maybe you find something in it relevant. But it's a lot of, so you should call it kind of like a shaman, kind of, you know, dealing with the spirits and so on, and there's a lot more nature type stuff, nature spirits. They've got this winged goddess and fanged god kind of thing. So instead of just being about the dark side, it's more like a balance between forces, and for them it's between the two gods that they have. Yeah, and kind of odd. Like, I wasn't really expecting this sort of thing to be in here. And yeah, but so it's got all that stuff about the worship of the spirits, and they're like mercenaries, so instead of trying to take over things themselves, they just sell their services to whoever will pay. And then there's stuff about the history of Dathomir, the history of the Night Sisters, there's stuff about the gods, talismans and stuff. So it's a bit more, it feels a bit more like magic, like more in the traditional way we think of magic, rather than the Force kind of thing. And that's one of the things that's been kind of interesting about these books, the Book of Sith and also the Jedi Path. There's stuff that I feel like I guess now it is in the Star Wars universe, but to me it's all like, this is not what I thought it would be. It's like, I think in the Jedi Path there was some stuff that seemed a bit like, bending, Avatar style bending, so they had water bending, nature kind of, all that kind of stuff. And I guess there was like lightning in the original trilogy, Force lightning, but there's heap more stuff that I'm just like, okay, so we're just expanding the Force to be every kind of weird magic supernatural thing now, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. But yeah, so it's like this wild power stuff is more like nature spirits, witchy kind of stuff, Wiccan-ish vibes. So that's kind of interesting. Blah blah blah, trading people, and then they have like this green energy that follows them around a lot. Some interesting stuff about different weapons and the different roles they play as they sell their services. And then there's some stuff about competing dark side traditions. So in the Jedi Path there was also like, competitors and also different Force-based traditions, Force-sensitive species, so I guess they do a little bit of that in here as well. And then it's like finishes on basically sell yourself for the glory of the Night Sisters, which, okay, I guess they don't have their own personalities is what she's trying to say, but hey. Anyway, so the next section... Does this have a name? I'll just quick go back to the intro and see if there's a name for this one. Darth Plagueis. No, it's just, okay, so this is where we get up to Darth Plagueis talking about, life. If you remember, in the prequel trilogy, how he's sitting with Anakin and there's all those, like, evil head turns. Oh my god, someone did edited them all together, and it's kind of funny to watch every time he looks at Anakin in that sort of menacing head turn kind of way. Talking about Plagueis and how he could manipulate life and so on. And so this section goes heavily into a lot of that stuff, but what's interesting and different, and a huge contrast from the previous Wild Power book, is instead of being all about magic and spirits, it takes more of a science-y kind of approach. It's trying to mix the Force with science and, that kind of thing. So he's basically researching life and, how things work with midichlorians. I don't even know if midichlorians were even mentioned before this point. So, I don't know if that's his personal theory or, where the concept came from. They don't really seem to explain that. But talking about them. And then there's these different pieces that make up the energy that is the Force. So the Aperion, which is more like gravity and I guess physics. The Anima, which gives life, so I guess spirits and shit. And I think that's most heavily tied to midichlorians maybe. And then the Pneuma, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. It's like Pneuma, Pneuma. Expression of conscious thought, thinking, self-awareness, blah, blah. And then there's this funny thing. I think these characters, these little letters can be translated, but I've done that for books before. Well, I think the Artemis Fowl books had a lot of code-breaking type stuff embedded in them, and there was a period in time where I went through and figured out what they all meant, but I just can't be bothered with this. There are some that you can kind of figure out, but then to actually sit down and then figure it out, I'm sure you could just go on the internet, but I couldn't be bothered. Anyway, so you get the idea. There's sort of funny diagrams like this. And then he's got this whole quest for extending his life, concentrating the Force, so manipulating midichlorians to clump together more and make things more powerful, and then the idea that midichlorians, when they're concentrated enough, they can create life. His philosophies of life, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there's a lot of this stuff. And then there's weirder things like transferring consciousness between bodies, whether that's a different body or like a cloned body, and that as a potential way to extend life. But I think he said something about how it's easier just to like pull the midichlorians out of someone else. But then there's this weird concept of if the midichlorians aren't in the right body, they might be rejected or something, a bit like, you know, a transplant. Yeah. And what happens to the souls when they die, and then there's like notes from Luke saying like, you know, spirits are real, whereas he's just saying like, you know, I don't know if they're really real, but obviously Luke's seen them. And then there's apparently Sith spirits that people have actually had to fight on the old Sith planets. Yeah, so here we go. Here's a little note from Luke. Oh, can you focus on it? I don't know. It says, anyone who dismisses the existence of Sith spirits has never fought one. It took every Jedi in my academy to defeat the spirit of Exar Kun. Kun? I don't know. And actually Darth Sidious also recognizes that the spirits are real, so he criticizes his... this is the guy... Plagueis trained Darth Sidious, so yeah, he criticizes his old master there. Yeah, and so there's stuff... There's like a weird bit... Oh, maybe it's this prophecy of the Chosen One. So Darth Plagueis talked about the prophecy of the Chosen One, which is the Jedi's thing. And then he's talking about how midichlorians, and how if he could get enough in a sufficient quantity, he could cause them to conceive a new life form with a lot of power, and basically create a being that seems to be like the Chosen One. And this is the point where you're like, oh, so did he have something to do with Anakin, maybe? And I've read some of the theories on the internet after reading that bit, and it's a little bit unsatisfying what they come up with. But it's kind of a cute question, because Anakin is an odd kind of thing. I mean, the prequels weren't great, but, you know, he fits the Chosen One prophecy in terms of destroying the Sith and bringing balance to the Force, because that's kind of what he does eventually. And balance to the Force, balance doesn't necessarily mean you get rid of evil, it means you balance the two sides. So if you're gonna kill off all the Jedi as well, and the Sith, that's balance, right? If everyone is dead, balance! Yeah, so there's a bit of stuff about that. And then the next page is this Sith Ari thing. And this is first mentioned in the very first book, that Sorzus person about somewhere in this section, they mentioned the prophecy of Sith Ari, which is like the Sith's version of the Chosen One. And at various points, I mean, nearly every Sith thinks that they are the Chosen One. So, the very first book that's mentioned, maybe it's me. Not in Darth Malgus, because he's too busy with his war. I don't think Darth Bane was like, hey, maybe you shouldn't assume that you're the last Sith, like you're gonna live forever. You have to assume that your apprentice is gonna kill you. So I think Darth Bane realized he wasn't gonna be some amazing Chosen One, although some people apparently think that maybe he was, because he did kind of remake the Sith, which is one of the things that the Sith's Chosen One's meant to do. But he seemed to have a more realistic view, like, you know, you are going to die. Yeah. Wild Power didn't have it because that's a different thing. But then Darth Plagueis is like, hey, I totally fit the whole Sith Chosen One prophecy. And like, yeah, okay, alright. That's cute, but then you died anyway, and you didn't really do anything that significant from what we can tell. Yeah. So that's a funny little thing. And then you get up to Darth Sidious's book, Absolute Power, which has a few different sections, and this part, it really gets more into the movie kinds of things, because it's telling like the story of how, you know, the false war, he sets up a war to further his aims of progressing through the ranks and getting power that way, and like, you know, manipulating things behind the scenes. It goes a lot into that kind of stuff. Using bureaucrats, hiding in plain sight, using This is where it gets a bit like social commentary, I feel, where it is like, you know, if you want a population to kind of be like obedient, then one of the ways you can do it is make them scared of some outside force so that they give more power to the government, kind of thing. So the Republic's alien species are the simplest targets. Most humans of the core already despise looking into their multiple eyes or listening to their clicking, buzzing languages. So it's kind of like racism but speciesism because they're aliens. So that's you know, fun, and he's talking about all that. One of the interesting things is like supposedly he's following the rule of two, right? But he has all these dudes. And I mean, what is the line between having an apprentice and having a bunch of minions who are like, you know, would almost reach the status of apprentice? That's something I wonder, because clearly Darth Sidious, I mean, you know what, he had Darth Maul, and then Dooku, does he count as an apprentice? It seemed to be like that. And then Anakin, it's like, how many apprentices are you going to burn through? And then he's got these other people, Darksiders. Some of them are like survivors from the Jedi Service Corps, so not the main Jedi warriors, but like still Force-sensitive people that he's using and, you know, made them turn to the dark side kind of thing to do what he wants. So like, you know, I mean, maybe they don't hold the title of Sith, but they're still dark side users, and kind of like, yeah, how does that fit into your philosophy? But by this point, you know, they're kind of getting a little bit nuts. I think, did Darth Plagueis mention it? Did he mention thing about, like, you know, instead of having a rule of two, there's going to be a rule of one? Both Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious are convinced that they're going to be the last Sith ever because they will live forever and have all the power, which is kind of cute and exactly what Darth Bane told them not to fall into, you know, always assume that you're going to die and so on. So, yeah, Darth Sidious has his own section on life, his own experiments and how he plans to achieve immortality. And I think that's the last bit, isn't it? Yeah, then you've got all the Disney credits. Yeah, so that's kind of cute, or I guess. And then he's got annotations on his own book. So I guess when he wrote it, he had a lot of dreams, but maybe at some point he saw a bit more reality, and he gets really frustrated with incompetent minions, really, who, you know, he's trying to, like, there's only so much you can do as one person, so you have to rely on other people, and other people tend to let you down, and that seems to be a lot of his annotations about that. But then there's, like, other things that he achieves. Yeah. So that's kind of the gist of the book. I thought it was kind of interesting. With the annotations, as I said in the other one, the Jedi Path, sometimes the way that they're positioned, and I don't have an example, you know, I could probably find one, but I can't be bothered to search. Sometimes the annotations feel like the way they're spaced on their page is not quite natural. Like, you know, they're trying to make it like a book, and then someone has later come in to leave an annotation, but sometimes it's like, oh, you totally left this space so that it would be easy to put an annotation in. But that's not a terrible thing. I think they don't do it in, I think it's actually done better in this than in the Jedi Path. I feel like the Jedi Path, they left more intentional space for annotations. But yeah, hard to say. One thing that kind of annoyed me is fucking Luke's annotations, because, you know, sometimes he'll comment something that isn't exactly relevant, and you're like, are you actually reading this book, or did someone on the writing team just want to make a particular comment and not know where to put it? Yeah, and then sometimes, like, it'll sort of be related, but he's completely missed the point of whatever they were saying, so that was kind of annoying. Occasionally, though, he does give the genuine Jedi perspective that you would kind of expect. It's just, yeah, sometimes the annotations don't quite make sense, and you're like, oh, okay. But yeah, I think I probably enjoyed this one more than the Jedi Path, because the Jedi Path was very about the structure of the Jedi Order, whereas this had more, well, it had more variety for one thing, because if you've got all these different books written by different authors with different emphasis, that gives it a bit more variety and different writing styles and so on, but you've still got a lot of the information about you know, how they build lightsabers, for example, and other different organizational things. You do still get it in this. I just feel like it was presented better than the Jedi path, which I think it probably makes sense though, because Jedi is very structured organization, and you know, the light side, it's more about harmony and you know, things being in order, whereas dark side stuff is more about chaos. And so you do get a sense of that chaos, I mean, just from the different papers that they're using, and the different topics that they're approaching. So that, like, you know, thematically probably works out. Yeah. And it's good that they still managed to weave in all the important stuff in there, I suppose. I thought I had one more thing in my brain to say, but it has escaped me. So, yeah, I don't know. Oh, that's the other thing. If you have both the books and you're like, which order should I read them in? I do think that the Jedi Path is the one to read first, because this does reference some of the things that happen in the Jedi Path. In the Jedi Path, they're talking about different forms of combat, and if you hadn't read that and you read this first, you'd be like, what the fuck is Form 7, you know? Whereas in the Jedi Path, they actually explain what that is. So I feel like I probably understood this one better than if I hadn't read the Jedi Path first. But it's such a small thing that, you know, it doesn't really matter. You could read this quite happily on its own without ever touching the Jedi Path. But you know me, duality, I've got to have both. And wow, I ended up managing to talk about a lot more than I thought I was going to. I'm going to wrap it up because I've got to eat something. You know, I've been having one of those lazy days. It's raining in Sydney, finally. Yeah, we've been going through a dry period. I actually got my punk rave stuff this morning, but I can't film in here because the lighting is terrible. I hope it looks okay. It does seem to be, but just with, you know, trying to show details on clothes, not going to happen in this lighting. But anyway, that's all for now. I'm going to get something to eat.